Hello and welcome to Glebe House and Gallery and their spectacular gardens. Glebe House is located on the edge of Garton Lake that you can see behind me here, in the foothills of the Derryveigh Mountains, the mountains of oak and birch. And Glebe House and Gardens is essential, it's crucial for nature as it provides a refuge, provides shelter for so many different plants and animals. There's a variety of habitats here. There's tall trees, smaller trees, there's shrubs, and then there's lower plants. And of course, there's these magnificent wildflower meadows that you see all around. Wildflower meadows are crucial, are very important for insect life. And insect life is of course important for all of the rest of biological diversity or biodiversity, and that includes you and I. Insects provide food for an awful lot of other bugs, for spiders of course, for bats, for birds, for so many different animals. And insects also provide a really important pollination service. 1/3 of the food that I consume throughout my life is pollinated by bumblebees, butterflies, hoverflies, and some of the other insects that we'll find in this wildflower meadow that is all around us here. So what is a wildflower meadow? Well, it's just as you see here. It's grasses and flowers mixed together. Quite often wildflower meadows are nutritionally poor. In other words, the soil isn't very good. So you don't have to do a huge amount to manage them, to maintain them, to encourage them. The soil itself will often have a natural seed bank. And if the nutrition is taken out of it or not added to it on a regular basis, the grasses won't do quite as well, and that gives the flowers, flowering plants, more of an opportunity to compete with those grasses. And as we can see in here, they're loving this wildflower meadow. There are so many different colours, there's so much different shapes, so many different textures, which give lots of different little hiding places and lots of opportunities for food for all of those insects. A really important aspect to wildflower meadows, to healthy wildflower meadows, is to be able to provide flowers throughout the summer. In fact, from spring right into autumn really, because each flower will last 2, maybe 3 weeks or so, and then it'll be pollinated, it'll have done its thing, but the next type of flower will start coming into season, and that's very important for our insects, so that they have food right throughout the season, not just a big show in June or a big show in July. And this plant that I have in my hand here hasn't quite come into flower yet. This is called knapweed. And knapweed is a lovely flower. It's a flower that loves wetlands. It loves wet ditches, wet grassland, and this is quite damp in here. It looks a bit like a thistle, but it doesn't have any prickles on it. It's a lovely friendly thing to have. It'll come into flower late July, August, and it'll keep flowering right through until September time. So it's a lovely one to add a bit of later colour to your garden. And it attracts loads of bugs. It gives huge amounts of nectar and pollen for the size of it. And in fact, these little white bubbles that you see here on the flower, these little white bubbles are created by an insect called a frog hopper. And what frog hoppers are doing, this frog hopper is eating through the stem of the knapweed, and it's sucking up some of the sap, and then it blows out this bubbly form of protection for itself. Blows out these bubbles, it hides in there, and the ever hungry birds that are looking for little bugs to eat, or the wasps, or the bats that'll appear later, they won't see any of these because they'll be hiding inside in their little bubbles, in their little protection. This little flower here, called Meadow Sweet, when I crush some of the flowers and have a smell, and there's a beautiful smell, and anybody who's walked in the countryside will recognise that smell. And once you've walked down any of those little ditches, those little lanes where the roadside verges are left alone, allowed grow and allowed mature, the scent of this will brush off your trousers and brush off your coat, and you'll end up carrying it home with you. And Meadow Sweet has so many little flowers in amongst this one big cluster. And each little flower has a little package of nectar for the butterflies, for the moths, for the bumblebees and the rest, and also a little package of pollen. And that's crucial for the bumblebees because it feeds that pollen to its babies. But as the bees or the butterflies go from flower to flower to flower, reaching deep into the flower to get the nectar, some of the pollen gets stuck to their hairy little bodies, and they will visit hundreds of flowers in a day. And by moving around from flower to flower, they're moving the pollen from flower to flower. And that, of course, is how the flowers get fertilised and the flowers turn into seeds. So if you want to have a wildflower meadow yourself, it's not the most difficult thing to do, but you need to remember that an awful lot of wildflowers, they don't like much nutrition, whereas grass does. Hence the farmers will spread the slurry, spread fertiliser to try and encourage grass to grow so that they can get a higher yield from their animals. So if you want a wildflower meadow in your garden, you have to try and take some of that nutrition out. And the trick to wildflower meadows is to allow them grow up like this, not fertilise them at all, and then around about September time, you strim them and you leave them sit for a couple of weeks. And all of the strim material will dry out and the seeds will fall down into the ground and you're increasing your seed bank. But then you have to rake up all those cuttings. And by raking up the cuttings, they don't rot into the ground. The nutrition in those cuttings is not being added into the ground. So you're depleting the nutrition from the soil all the time. And your wildflowers will thank you for that. Another great way of helping the wildflowers to compete with the grasses, the ever tough grasses, is to plant some of this amazing little flower here, a native plant called yellow rattle. And the yellow rattle, it is a parasitic plant. Yellow rattle, what it does, its roots, they twist around the roots of the grasses and the neighbouring plants, and they are able to take nutritions with the aid of bacteria and fungus that's in the soil. They're able to take nutrition and deplete the grasses of nutrition. So they're able to fight the grasses underneath the ground by taking nutrition from them. And by doing that, they're fighting away at the grasses, which gives the other wildflowers you see here more of an opportunity to be able to grow up. And yellow rattle has these beautiful little yellow flowers. And once they're pollinated, because the insects love the yellow rattle, they will turn into these very attractive kind of purpley and green little seed heads until they eventually get completely brown and give the flower its name and turn into little brown seed heads, which will be full of seeds. And you can even see some of the seeds falling out there, falling out into my hand. And then that is next year's crop that will compete with these grasses and give the other wildflowers a better chance to be able to grow in it and be able to compete. This species of buttercup is called meadow buttercup, and it's a little bit different to the creeping buttercup, which is more common that you'll get in lawns and so many gardens around the country. Creeping buttercup is able to withstand the chopping from the motor all the time, from the lawnmowers all the time, whereas meadow buttercup, it has the ability to be able to reach up. And that's important with all of these long grasses around it and the other long flowers around it, to be able to reach up and grab some light, get its energy. But it's also important to be able to be very tall and display its colours on its petals to the passing insects, because there's a big competition between it. Each one of these flowers is putting on the best show it can to try and attract a passing hoverfly or butterfly or bumblebee or some other kind of pollinating insect. The shiny petals of the buttercup, they are really, really obvious, really visible to the pollinating insect. Once it lands on there and it pollinates the flower, well then that flower, of course, turns into seeds. And you can see the little seed heads on the inside of the buttercups. And in time, they will dry out over the next few weeks, turn brown, and they will fall down into the ground. And that will be next year's buttercups, next year's meadow buttercups, ready to compete with all the other grasses here in this beautiful wildflower meadow. So a little fly has just landed on one of my it's just taken off, one of my very favourite flowers in this wildflower meadow, ragged robin. And this meadow, in this beautiful Glebe house gardens, managed so well by the staff that are here looking after this place. There are so many, there's such a variety of different wildflowers. There's different species of clover, there's different buttercups, there's birdfoot trefoil, there's plantain, there's self-heal, there's eyebright, and that's all just within reaching distance of here. Meadow sweet, quite a few different grasses, there's some rushes, and then this very beautiful ragged robin. You can't just plant any old seeds in any old place. You have to figure out, is your soil dry, is it draining, or is it damp? And a real sign that this is a reasonably damp area is that meadow sweet, that big white puffy meadow sweet, and the ragged robin. This stuff loves damp grassland, damp mud. And if it has that, it will thrive, and it attracts so many pollinators. They land and they pollinate, and then they, of course, will allow the seeds to be fertilised and to grow and to develop. And those tiny, tiny little seeds then will scatter in amongst the grasses and become next year's ragged robins. So many flowers and so many grasses. Of course, this is all shelter for so many bugs, and that's essential. It's essential for the robins and the wrens and the chaffinches that I can hear right now behind us. It's essential for the house martins and for the swallows that have been skimming Garton Lake just behind us. Those house martins and those swallows, they travel thousands of kilometres to here to come and have their families in Donegal, in Ireland. And it's incumbent on us to provide the right habitats, the right shelter and the right food for them. They have come all the way back to here. They have been coming here before there was people. So this is their home just as much as it's ours. And by providing areas like this, managing areas like this for nature, for an abundance of insect life, well, then we're setting up a good start for those swallows. Those swallows that will be born this year, they will be able to eat their hundreds of insects every single day, which is what they need to build up fat reserves, to be able to fly that massive journey, that 10,000 kilometres all the way back to South Africa. And certainly the swallows that are in this area and the birds that are in this area are being provided with both shelter and food. In times past, an awful lot of our gardens and an awful lot of our wild areas would have looked quite like this. Long, tall grasses going to seeds with a big variety of flowers, a big mixture of flowers, many different types of vegetation, different shapes, different places for all of the creatures to be able to hide and to be able to feed and to be able to shelter and rest when the weather turns. And it's only in Victorian times that we've started this notion of tidying up our forest, of creating lawns, and then in more recent times of spraying chemical after chemical to try and fight off the mosses or fight off what we call weeds, which of course are just beautiful buttercups or clovers or dandelions in places that we don't want. But now there's a big change. More and more people are starting to see the value and the beauty of areas like this. And they cut paths through it so we can enjoy it, but also so we can see that it is managed. It hasn't just been completely let go. Somebody is tending this place, somebody is looking after this place and preserving all of the biodiversity, helping all of the biodiversity in the area. And it's something that you can do at home, even if you only have a 1 metre square patch that you can give up. Let the flowers grow, let the grass grow long. Trim it back in September, remove the clippings, see what comes up year on year. And then in time you might find yourself expanding that area. So thanks to people doing that, creating little refuges for pollinators and for all the other insects, and thanks to the wonderful work that the gardeners and the people that are working here and managing this beautiful Glebe House gallery and gardens, our nature has a good chance.